God, how did I let it all slip away? My fingers hover over the keyboard, trembling as I prepare to write the truth for the first time. I'm Sofia Vasquez, architect, mother, survivor. For years I've watched as others took credit for my work, my life, but now I'm ready to tell my story, and this time no one will steal it from me. I'm 49 years old, a senior project coordinator at Reynolds Architecture and Design. I've worked here for 8 years, but it feels as though I've been building a life in architecture much longer. I didn't arrive at this point without sacrifice, without a cost. The road here was never easy. I started as a humble drafting assistant in New York, a mere cog in the massive wheel of design, where my days were filled with tracing lines and learning the fundamentals. But it wasn't long before I realized that I had the heart for it, the deep drive to create spaces that did more than just house people. They made them feel alive, part of the environment, connected to something bigger than themselves. But even then, I knew my life was different. I wasn't just building projects, I was building a life as a single mother, raising my daughter, Maria, who's now 16. Every decision, every late night spent poring over blueprints, every morning spent hustling to balance deadlines with parent-teacher meetings, was done for her future, for us. When Reynolds offered me a position 8 years ago, I thought my struggles were over. The promise of creative freedom, the opportunity to take on larger projects, to make my mark in the world of sustainable design, it seemed like everything I'd worked for had finally paid off. At first I thrived. The Coastal Restoration Project, a community initiative designed to rebuild waterfront spaces using reclaimed materials, became my crown jewel, the project that proved my vision could be both beautiful and functional, while standing the test of the elements. But then she came along. Karen Mitchell. She was younger than me, brash, confident, and somehow in a matter of months she secured a position that I'd worked my entire career to earn. How did it happen? I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. She was hired as a project manager, but she had an agenda, a hidden ambition that none of us could see. She understood how to play the game. A strategic lunch here, a weekend at the founder's Catskills cabin there. She worked her way into Harold Reynolds' good graces, into the very fabric of the firm's leadership. I admired her ambition at first. I saw myself in her, driven, hungry for success. I thought, maybe she would be a mentor, someone I could learn from, someone who could elevate my own career. But that vision quickly faded. Karen wasn't interested in mentorship. She wasn't interested in collaboration. What she wanted was recognition, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. It started small. A collaborative presentation where my contributions went unmentioned, my ideas repurposed as if they were her own. I told myself it was a mistake, an oversight. But it kept happening. Projects that I'd poured my soul into were reassigned, suddenly under her direction. She began interrupting me in meetings, tweaking my ideas just enough to pass them off as her own. Sophia had an interesting starting point, she would say, but I refined it into something more practical. At first I kept quiet. I believed my work would speak for itself, that if I kept pushing forward, kept delivering excellence, the recognition would eventually come. But it didn't, at least not for me. Karen was already presenting my work as hers. She was positioning herself for leadership while I was stuck in the shadows. The whispers around the office were inevitable. Did you hear what Karen did with Sophia's coastal concept? David, one of the senior architects, once murmured to me after a meeting. He, like the others, noticed it. They all noticed it. Even Jenna, our receptionist, started marking my designs with timestamps, giving me silent support, but it felt like too little too late. So I kept working. I worked even harder, thinking that maybe if I did, things would improve. But they didn't. The day we won the Regional Design Excellence Award for the Coastal Restoration Project was the day I realized Karen had claimed the victory for herself. She accepted the award, standing on stage, her speech never once mentioning my name. I should have been happy for the firm, for the project, but all I could feel was a bitter, gnawing sense of injustice. That night, something inside me shifted. I began backing up my work, emails, design files, everything. Not because I wanted to confront her, not yet. I was still hopeful, still holding on to the belief that maybe things would change. But I also needed peace of mind. I needed to know that if it came to it, I had proof of my contributions, of my dedication to the firm. I didn't realize how much I was fooling myself. I didn't know that Karen had already planned her next move, a move that would put me in the line of fire. And then, just like that, it happened. I had just returned from a meeting when I received a call from our receptionist. "Sophia, there's someone from Archer and Hayes in the lobby. He says it's about the consultation you did for..." I froze. Archer and Hayes? Our biggest competitor? I had never worked with them, not once. But there was a sinking feeling in my stomach as I walked toward the elevator. I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse than I realized was unfolding. Could Karen have... What if she was already taking it too far? What if she was selling my work to our competitors? What if they had already started using my designs? What if my career was on the verge of collapse? The elevator doors closed with a soft chime. As I descended, I couldn't help but wonder, how could I have missed this? The elevator seemed to move too slowly, as if it were dragging me to some unknown fate. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears, and I felt a tightness in my throat. I kept replaying the words from our receptionist, "Archer and Hayes, about the consultation you did for..." I had never done any work for them. So why were they calling for me? What was going on? The doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped into the lobby. There he was, a man in his 50s, well-dressed, a neatly trimmed beard, holding a tablet in his hands. He smiled as I approached, extending his hand. "Miss Vasquez, James Donovan from Archer and Hayes, thank you for meeting with me." I didn't shake his hand immediately. My mind was still reeling. 1,000 questions raced through my head, but I forced myself to remain composed. "I'm afraid there must be some misunderstanding," I said, my voice tight, trying to keep the confusion from showing. "I've never consulted for your firm." James's smile faltered just slightly, the briefest of pauses before he spoke. "That's strange. We have preliminary designs for our Portland waterfront project attributed to you. Karen Mitchell shared them with us last month. She said you provided consultation." My stomach dropped. The Portland waterfront. That was my concept, my late-night sketches, my ideas to revitalize the city's harbor district with elevated green spaces, flexible flood-prone areas. I had designed it as a personal exercise, something for me, never intending to share it with anyone, certainly not a competitor. "May I see these designs?" I asked, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. I fought to maintain control, even though everything inside me was screaming in panic. He pulled out the tablet, his fingers swiping across the screen to reveal the rendering. They were my renderings. Unmistakably so. The core concept was mine, the elements of my design evident in every line, every curve, but there were slight modifications, enough to make it appear as if they were the result of collaboration. My stomach churned. This wasn't just about Karen taking credit for my work within the firm. She had taken it beyond the walls of Reynolds. She had sold my ideas to our competitors. James noticed my reaction and took a small step back, as if sensing my mounting discomfort. "We were quite impressed by the designs," he continued. "In fact, we've already incorporated several elements into our final proposal for the project." My mind was racing. I had no words that could make sense of this. I had worked for months on this project, staying up late to perfect every detail, convinced it was just a personal outlet. But now Karen had turned my private work into her own, passing it off as collaborative. And not just that, she had sold it to a competing firm, without my knowledge, without my consent. I forced myself to speak, my voice quiet but firm. "Who else has seen these designs?" "Our entire executive team," James replied, "and we've already presented them to the Portland Development Commission. They were quite excited about the project." A feeling of disbelief washed over me. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I could feel the tension building inside me, the pressure of everything I had worked for, everything I had built about to crumble. My stomach twisted. How could this be happening? Karen hadn't just taken my ideas, she had positioned them as her own, sold them to someone else, and now the entire project was moving forward without me. The sinking feeling in my stomach was no longer just a sensation. It was a weight, a crushing force that threatened to overwhelm me. This wasn't just professional theft. It was betrayal on a level I had never imagined. I cleared my throat, my mind racing to process everything. "I need to check something with my office," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to me. "Excuse me for a moment." I turned away quickly, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. My heart was in my throat. I couldn't breathe. How could she have done this? I had spent years building my career, fighting for every ounce of recognition. I had trusted Karen, once thought she was an ally, someone who would help me grow. But now it was clear. She had been using me from the very beginning, slowly, methodically, taking everything I created and presenting it as her own. As I reached my desk, I noticed the phone buzzing on my desk. It was a text from David. "How'd the meeting go?" Karen looked smug, as expected. I read it once, then again, my eyes scanning the words as if hoping the message would change. I didn't respond immediately. The message felt like an echo, a reminder that everyone knew what was happening. Everyone but me. I stared at my desk, my mind filled with one thought. I needed to find the evidence, and I needed to find it fast. But deep down, I already knew. This was no longer just about Karen taking credit for my work. This was a battle for my career, my reputation, my future. And now, more than ever, I needed to be careful. The clock was ticking, and I had to make my next move count. The next step was going to change everything. I sat at my desk for what felt like an eternity, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The walls of the office seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights above buzzing in a dull, rhythmic hum. My mind raced, each thought tumbling over the other. I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. The world I had spent 8 years building, my career, my reputation, was crumbling right before my eyes, all because of Karen. She had taken my work, twisted it, sold it, and now she was positioning herself for the spotlight I had earned. I could already see it. The news articles, the press releases, the official announcements that would highlight Karen's so-called visionary work on the Portland waterfront project. No mention of me, no mention of my late nights spent working on the designs, of the countless revisions, of the passion I poured into those plans. Just her. Always her. And yet, in the midst of all this, part of me still clung to the belief that there must be a way out of this. Maybe if I could just explain the situation to someone who would listen. Maybe if I had the right evidence. I glanced at the drawer where I'd started collecting files, documents, and emails. My external hard drive sat there, its cold, metallic exterior a silent reminder of everything I'd been building for the past few months. Since Karen's behavior had begun shifting, since the meetings where she took credit for my work, since the countless projects that had slipped from my grasp, I'd started saving everything. Every email, every design, every timestamp, every note, not because I intended to confront her right away, but because I knew that sooner or later I'd need to protect myself. And today was that day. The thought of confrontation still filled me with dread. I had always been conflict-averse, the type to work through things quietly and methodically, hoping that eventually things would fall into place. But this time, I couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about a few stolen ideas anymore. It was about my career, my integrity, and above all, my sense of self-worth. Suddenly the phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was David again. "Hey, Sophia," he said, his voice low. "I don't know what you've heard that, but Karen is already working on a story. She's been telling people you've been underperforming, that you've been difficult to work with. She's framing this as your fault. The whole thing." I felt the room spin as if the ground beneath me was slipping away. Underperforming? Difficult to work with? I could feel the anger rising in my chest. I'd always worked hard. I'd always pushed myself to deliver excellence. But now she was manipulating my image, poisoning the well, and turning everyone against me. She had the power to rewrite the narrative, and I had no say in the matter. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "I knew this was coming," I said quietly. "But we need to get ahead of it. I need the truth out there, David. I need to expose her. We can't let her get away with this." "Okay," he replied, his voice steady despite the tension. "I've got your back, Sophia. Just say the word." The words hung heavy in the air between us. I need to expose her. Could I really do this? Could I really confront Karen, expose the truth, and risk everything for the sake of my integrity? I closed my eyes again, imagining the fallout. The lawsuits, the media attention, the potential damage to the firm. Would Harold back me? Would anyone believe me, given Karen's polished image and carefully curated narrative? I knew the answer to that, and it terrified me. I have to be sure, I thought, my fingers tightening around the phone. I can't let this go. But what if no one would listen? What if Karen's manipulation had already sunk too deep into the fabric of Reynolds? What if she'd already won? Just then, I saw a figure standing in the doorway of my office. Jenna, our receptionist, looked at me with a worried expression. She didn't speak immediately, but I saw the silent support in her eyes, the quiet acknowledgement that she knew that everyone knew what was happening. Jenna, what is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to say, we all know what she's doing, Sophia. You're not alone in this. A lump formed in my throat, and for the first time in months, I felt the tears threaten to spill. I'm not alone. It was a small gesture, just a few words. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't the only one who had seen Karen for what she truly was. People were starting to notice. They were starting to see the truth. I nodded at Jenna, my voice thick. Thank you. She offered me a small, sad smile before leaving, and I sat there for a moment, letting her words sink in. Maybe Karen thought she had everyone in her corner, but she didn't. Not anymore. I had people who cared, people who saw the truth. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not until I could make them see the full extent of her betrayal. My phone buzzed again, interrupting my thoughts. It was an email from Harold. Sophia, we need to talk about the Portland project. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.? I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart thudding in my chest. Tomorrow was my chance. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. It was time to make my move. The moment I'd been dreading, the moment I'd been preparing for, it was finally here. And I wasn't going to back down. I'd fight for my work. I'd fight for the truth. And I'd fight for the career I had built, no matter the cost. The hours between receiving Harold's email and the next morning felt like a blur, a suspended period in time. I couldn't focus. I paced the apartment, my thoughts spinning in endless circles. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the stolen work, the lies, was almost unbearable. But I knew this meeting would be the turning point. This was where everything would either fall apart or finally begin to come together. As I sat down in front of my laptop, preparing the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the past few weeks, my hands trembled. The external hard drive that had sat quietly in my drawer for so long now felt like the key to everything. The timestamps, the emails, the design files, all of it was there. All of it was irrefutable. If I presented this evidence, there would be no denying the truth. But doubt lingered, as it always did. What if they didn't believe me? What if Karen had already woven her story too well? My mind raced back to all those moments I'd tried to speak up, only to be dismissed, only to watch as Karen played her game of influence, weaving her web of lies with ease. What if Harold, too, had already made up his mind? What if this was a trap to get me to incriminate myself? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts aside. I couldn't afford to second-guess myself now. The clock on my desk ticked loudly, marking the minutes slipping away. I took a deep breath and closed my laptop, picking up the hard drive. I had to believe that the truth was on my side. I had to trust that, despite everything, there were people who would see what Karen had done. The drive to the office felt like a dream. My mind was numb, my thoughts swirling with a mixture of fear and determination. My eyes kept flicking back to the hard drive sitting in my bag, as if it held the answers to all my questions. As I pulled into the parking garage and made my way to the building, I tried to steady myself, taking slow, deliberate breaths. The elevator ride was the longest part of the morning. My hands were cold, my heart beat loud in my ears. I stepped out into the lobby where the usual buzz of office chatter filled the space, but it felt distant, muffled. Everything seemed to slow down, as if I was walking through a fog. When I entered the conference room, Harold was already there, sitting at the head of the table. His face looked more tired than usual, as if the weight of everything had finally begun to catch up with him. He looked up when I entered, his eyes briefly meeting mine before he glanced at the empty chair across from him. I didn't speak. Instead, I walked toward the chair, sat down, and placed my bag on the table, keeping my eyes on the hard drive nestled within it. Thank you for coming, Sophia, Harold said, his voice quieter than usual. I know this is a difficult situation, but we need to address the Portland project. There's confusion regarding the authorship of the design. I need you to clarify your involvement. I nodded, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. This was it. The moment where everything could either come crashing down or begin to unravel Karen's web of deceit. I was no longer just a passive observer in this. I was the one who would expose the truth. I understand, I replied, my voice calm, though my hands betrayed me, trembling slightly as I reached for my bag. And I can clarify everything for you, but before we get into that, I need to show you something. Harold raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, his eyes following my movements as I retrieved the external hard drive and placed it carefully in front of me. I could feel the tension building in the room. The others, David, a few board members, and even Karen, were sitting silently watching me. I opened the drive and began connecting it to the conference room's computer, my fingers moving with practiced precision. The screen lit up, and I opened the first file, an email chain between Karen and me from 3 years ago. My heart beat faster as I clicked through the files, each one revealing another layer of Karen's manipulation. This, I began, my voice steady, is the proof. The truth of what's been happening. The designs for the Portland project? They're mine. The initial concept, the sketches, the ideas, they were developed by me, alone. And here, I pointed to the email thread that was now displayed on the screen. Karen herself acknowledged my involvement in the coastal restoration project and requested my input on several ideas. She knew I was the one behind the concepts. I could feel the weight of the room shift. The others were leaning in, watching intently. Karen's face remained impassive, though I could see the faintest twitch in her eye. But I wasn't finished yet. I clicked on another file, metadata from the design files I had submitted for the Portland waterfront. Here's the timeline, I said, my voice growing more confident. These timestamps show that these designs were created well before Karen ever began presenting them as her own. The files have been meticulously saved, documented, and timestamped. They prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I am the author of these ideas and that Karen has been passing them off as her own. The silence in the room was deafening. No one spoke, but I could see the realization creeping into their faces. The shock, the disbelief. Harold's expression had softened, his eyes now filled with a mixture of regret and something else I couldn't quite place. Then came the final blow. I clicked on the final file, the one that would expose everything. It was an email exchange from a few weeks ago. It was the one where Karen had sent the Portland waterfront designs to Archer and Hayes, claiming they were part of a collaborative project. I'd never seen this email before, but it didn't matter. It was irrefutable evidence of her selling my work to a competitor. Here, I said, my voice low but firm. This email is where Karen sold my designs to Archer and Hayes. She presented my concepts as her own, and worse, she did it without my knowledge or consent. She's been selling my work to our competitors. I leaned back in my chair, watching the room as the weight of the evidence settled in. I could see the realization dawning on everyone. This wasn't just a matter of stolen credit. This was corporate theft, manipulation, and betrayal on a massive scale. Karen opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. She stared at the screen, her face pale, her composure crumbling in front of everyone. Harold's gaze turned to her, his eyes hardening. "Karen, is this true?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. For the first time in our entire interaction, Karen didn't speak. She couldn't. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. "Karen," Harold said again, his voice now cold, "I'm afraid you've been found out." The room was still. Time seemed to stretch in the silence. This was it, the moment everything changed. And as Karen's facade shattered, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace settle over me. I had fought for the truth, and it had finally been heard. The silence that followed Harold's words felt like a heavy weight pressing down on me. Karen's facade had crumbled, but I couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. This was only the beginning. As I sat there watching Karen's face go from pale to flushed with anger and disbelief, I realized that this moment would define the rest of my career. I had exposed the truth, but what came next? I could feel Harold's eyes on me, waiting. The board members were quiet, their expressions mixed with concern and surprise. The truth was out there now, but it wasn't enough to stop at this point. I had to take the next step. I cleared my throat, breaking the tension that had held the room hostage. This isn't just about credit anymore, I said, my voice steady but firm. It's about the integrity of the work we do here. If we allow someone to take credit for what they didn't create, we're undermining everything we stand for. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. If we allow Karen to continue in her position, then everything we've worked for here, every project, every breakthrough, becomes tainted. I saw the reactions of the others. David's eyes narrowed, his jaw set in determination. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flicking between Karen and me. But it was Harold who had the power to make the final call. He looked down at the table for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice now carrying the weight of responsibility. "This company was built on a foundation of trust and honesty, and we cannot let that be destroyed." For a fleeting moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim what was rightfully mine. But I couldn't forget the emotional cost of all this. It was easy for Harold to speak of integrity, but he had let Karen's manipulations go unchecked for far too long. The damage had been done, and I couldn't forgive him so easily. I swallowed my rising frustration and took a deep breath, knowing I had to stay focused on the bigger picture. What happens now? My voice controlled but pointed. Harold looked at me with a tired, apologetic expression. "We'll need to make this right, Sophia. We'll talk to the Portland officials, explain the situation, and make sure they know who was truly behind the project. But beyond that, we'll need to address Karen's position here. This can't go unpunished." At that moment, I knew what I had to do. If I wanted to regain control of my career, if I wanted to rebuild my reputation, I couldn't wait for the company to take action on their own. I had to take matters into my own hands. I stood up slowly, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. "I need more than just words, Harold," I said, my tone clear and unwavering. "I need a full acknowledgement of my work on the Portland project. I need this company to reinstate my position with the creative freedom and recognition I deserve. I want Karen removed from any project involving my design." Harold's face darkened, and I could see the internal struggle playing out behind his eyes. "Sophia, you know it's not that simple," he began. "Karen is—" "I don't care about Karen's position anymore," I interrupted, cutting him off. "This is about my career, my life. I spent years working my ass off for recognition I never received. And now you want me to just sit back and let it? No, I'm not doing that. If this company truly values me, truly values the work I've put in, then I need more than just a pat on the back. I need actions, I need justice." The room fell silent again, the tension palpable. I wasn't sure if Harold would agree to my terms, but I couldn't back down, not anymore. This had gone far beyond the work itself. It was about the respect I deserved, and had been denied for far too long. Harold shifted in his seat, his hands clasped in front of him. "I understand," he said quietly, the weight of his words sinking in, "but I need time to consult with the board. This won't be an easy decision." I nodded slowly, my eyes never leaving his. "Time is something I don't have anymore," I said, my voice firm but resigned. "I need a decision by the end of the day. Either I get full recognition for my work, or I walk away from Reynolds for good." I turned to face the rest of the room, my gaze sweeping across the board members and David. They were silent, but I could see the understanding in their eyes. This wasn't just a battle for credit. It was a battle for my dignity, my future. "I'll give you time to think, Harold," I said finally, "but I won't wait forever." I grabbed my bag, the external hard drive still nestled inside. As I turned to leave, I felt the weight of the decision I had just made. I wasn't just fighting for the truth. I was fighting for my place in the world. And as I walked out of the conference room, I knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened next, I wasn't going to let Karen, or anyone else, take credit for my work again. Not now. Not ever. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I moved through the office like a ghost, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. I knew I had made the right decision, but there was still a lingering fear, a sense of uncertainty about what would happen next. At 4:30 p.m., Harold called me into his office. He looked weary, but there was something different in his eyes now. something like respect, or maybe just the realization of the mistake he had made. "I spoke with the board," he said, his voice calm but serious. "We've decided to reinstate you, Sophia. We'll make the necessary announcements to the team and ensure that you're fully credited for your work on the Portland project. As for Karen, we've decided to remove her from any project involving your designs. She's been placed on a leave of absence while we conduct a full internal review." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was bittersweet. The damage had been done, and the scars would never completely heal. But this was justice. This was a step toward regaining everything I had lost. "I appreciate that," I said quietly, "but I still need more." Harold nodded slowly, understanding the weight of my request. "We'll also offer you a new leadership role, with creative control over your projects, just as you had requested, and I'll make sure you get the recognition you deserve. You've earned it, Sophia." The words hung in the air, and for a moment I just stood there, letting them sink in. This wasn't just a victory for me, it was a victory for everyone who had ever felt invisible, overlooked, or taken advantage of. I had fought for my career, and I had won. As I left Harold's office, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. I had gotten what I wanted, but the fight was far from over. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I would make sure my work would never again be taken for granted. The aftermath of the meeting was a blur of activity. My reinstatement at Reynolds Architecture felt like a quiet victory, but there was no escaping the undercurrent of tension that remained in the office. Word had spread quickly that I was being reinstated, and that Karen had been removed from any projects involving my designs, but there was still a quiet hum of disbelief. People weren't sure how to react. They knew what had happened, but the situation was so delicate, so fraught with the kind of corporate drama that made everyone uneasy. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me as I walked through the halls. Some of them, like David, were supportive, their silent nods of solidarity a small comfort. Others were less certain, perhaps unsure of how to view me now that the truth had come out. It didn't matter, I had what I needed: the recognition, the vindication, and the promise of a new future. But I couldn't let myself relax, not yet. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. I knew Karen wasn't going to take this lying down. She had been at the top of the food chain for years, pulling strings behind the scenes, controlling the narrative. Now that I had exposed her, I couldn't help but wonder how far she would go to reclaim her power, to destroy what I had just fought so hard to rebuild. It wasn't long before I got my answer. The following morning, I arrived at the office to find a message waiting for me. An email from Karen. I opened it hesitantly, not sure what to expect. The subject line simply read, "We need to talk." I took a deep breath before opening the message. The words inside were sharp but coldly professional. An attempt, I thought, to maintain some semblance of control despite the situation. "Sophia, I am aware that the company has reinstated you, and I wanted to reach out personally. While I understand the decision, I believe it was made without full consideration of the facts. I have evidence that could completely change the course of this situation. I expect we can have an open discussion about this, and I would appreciate the opportunity to clear my name and resolve these matters without further escalation. Best regards, Karen Mitchell." I read the message twice, trying to absorb the meaning behind it. She was threatening me, threatening to expose something that could undo everything I had worked for. She wasn't just going to go away quietly. This was far from over. I sat there for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. How was I supposed to respond to this? What could I say to someone who had taken everything from me and who now sought to drag me down even further? But then I remembered. I remembered the files, the documentation, the irrefutable evidence I had on my side. There was nothing Karen could say or do to change the facts, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation any longer. I typed a response, my fingers steady on the keys, my words clear and firm. "Karen, there is nothing left to discuss. The evidence speaks for itself. Your actions have been exposed, and I will not be intimidated by any threats you might make. You've tried to destroy my career once, but you won't get the chance to do it again. Any attempt to undermine me or challenge the company's decision will be met with legal action, and I will make sure the truth is known to everyone. This is over. Sofia Vasquez, I hit send without a second thought. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore, it was about drawing a clear line in the sand. There would be no going back after this. I had nothing left to lose. As I leaned back in my chair, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had done what I needed to do. The ball was now in Karen's court. But I knew this wouldn't be the end of it. She was a fighter, a manipulator, and I had no doubt she would continue to scheme. But I was ready for whatever came next. As the days passed, I threw myself into my work with renewed purpose. I had made a name for myself in the company once, and now I had to do it again. But this time it would be different. I would not just be known for my designs, I would be known for my integrity, my ability to fight for what was right. And I would make sure that my work, the work I had spent years perfecting, would be recognized by everyone, not just by those who had previously taken it for granted. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and long hours in the office. I began to take control of the Portland waterfront project, overseeing its direction and making sure the design stayed true to the original vision. The city officials had been impressed by my work, and now they were counting on me to lead the project forward. I took pride in knowing that this was my vision, my ideas, and my execution. It felt like a redemption of sorts, a way of reclaiming everything that had been stolen from me. But then came the unexpected. One afternoon, as I was reviewing some new design plans for the waterfront project, I received a call from Harold. His voice was strained and I could tell something was off. "Sophia, I need you to come to my office. Now!" I immediately stood up, a sense of unease settling in my chest. What now? What more could Karen possibly do? When I arrived in his office, Harold was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. He turned when I entered, his expression tight, and gestured for me to sit. "Sophia, I don't know how to say this," Harold began, his voice low, "but there's been another development. Karen has, well, she sent copies of some of the files you showed us to an external party. We think she's trying to use them against you." My heart sank. Against me? Who? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know yet," Harold said, his face grim, "but she's not going to stop. You need to be prepared. This isn't over." A chill ran down my spine. The war wasn't just about my work anymore. Karen wasn't playing by the rules, and I was going to have to fight harder than I ever had before. I nodded, my resolve hardening. "Then let's make sure we end it once and for all." The consequences of this battle were far from clear, but one thing was certain. I was no longer just fighting for my job. I was fighting for my future, for my place in the world, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. The weeks that followed were a blur of tense phone calls, late-night strategy sessions, and endless emails. I had thought that once the truth about Karen was exposed, things would start to calm down. Instead, they only escalated. Karen wasn't backing down. She'd found ways to leak the evidence I had shown Harold, subtly feeding it to the press and to some of our firm's clients. She was trying to destroy me in the court of public opinion, painting me as a disgruntled former employee desperate to tarnish her reputation. But I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative again. I had already seen how far Karen was willing to go to protect herself, how much manipulation it took to keep her power intact. But I had learned her game, and now I was playing by my own rules. I knew that Karen's attempts to control the story weren't just about fighting for her position at Reynolds. They were about saving herself from the professional ruin that was closing in on her. I had to make sure that I didn't let her play this out any longer. She was already a pariah within the firm, and it was only a matter of time before the full scope of her deception would be known. I was determined to be the one to make sure of it. It started with small, careful moves. I called in favors from a few trusted colleagues who had been quietly supporting me all along. I reached out to industry contacts who had worked with me in the past and asked them to lend their support, or at least to speak to the value of my work on the Portland project. The thing about Karen's manipulations was that they were obvious to those who had worked with me. The more I reminded people of the years of work I had done, the designs I had led, the projects I had successfully managed, the more they realized just how far Karen had gone in stealing from me. By the time I was ready to take the next step, the tide had begun to shift. I had gathered enough support that when Karen attempted to challenge my leadership on the Portland waterfront project, there was no one left in the company willing to stand by her. The executive board had seen through her web of deceit. She wasn't going to get away with it. One morning, a week after I had confronted Harold in his office, I received an unexpected call. It was from Jenna, the receptionist. Her voice was anxious, and there was a slight tremor to her words. "Sophia, Karen just walked out of the office. She's gone. HR just sent a message to the team saying they're finalizing her termination today." I froze for a moment. This was it. After months of tension, the consequences were finally catching up with her. It wasn't just the exposure of her theft that had led to this, it was the full weight of her years of manipulation and deceit finally being revealed. People were talking, and not in the way she had hoped. The office had turned against her. Even some of her old allies had begun to see the truth. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction at first, but it quickly faded into something else. A kind of quiet vindication. This wasn't the victory I had imagined. I wasn't gloating or celebrating. I was just relieved. Relieved that the system of lies Karen had built around herself had finally cracked. Relieved that her grip on the company was slipping. I wasn't the only one who felt it. That afternoon, as I walked through the office on my way to a meeting, I noticed something different. The air was lighter. The whispers had stopped, replaced by conversations that seemed almost normal again. People were starting to talk openly, to share their stories. I overheard snippets of conversations about Karen's manipulations, the way she had undermined colleagues, the quiet frustration that had been building for years. It became clear to me then, I wasn't just fighting for my own reputation anymore. I was fighting to reclaim the integrity of the firm I had spent so many years working for. This wasn't just about me. It was about making sure that no one else had to go through what I had endured. The next day I was called into a meeting with Harold. He sat across from me, his expression more somber than usual, though there was a trace of relief in his eyes. "Sophia," he began, "I want to personally apologize for how everything unfolded. I failed you in the beginning. I should have seen what was happening. We all should have." I could tell he meant it. There was no arrogance in his voice, no defensiveness, just a genuine regret. "I've spoken to the board, and they're fully backing your leadership on the Portland project. We're going to make a public statement about your contributions, and I want you to be the one to present the final design to the Portland Development Commission. It's only right that you take the lead on this." His words were a balm to the raw wound I had been carrying for months. It was more than just an apology, it was validation. Validation that, despite everything Karen had tried to do, I had not only survived, but had come out stronger. My work would finally be acknowledged, and my place at Reynolds would be secured. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. "I'll take the lead," I said quietly, "and thank you." But there was something more I needed to hear. Something I had been waiting for since the day Karen had taken credit for my work, the recognition. "And what about Karen?" I asked, my voice steady, but still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "What's going to happen to her?" Harold hesitated for a moment, his gaze hardening. "She's gone. She's been escorted out of the building this morning. We've severed all ties with her, and we've made sure that her actions, everything she did, will be documented so that this never happens again." I felt a strange, unexpected sense of closure. Karen was gone, and there would be no more stealing of my work, no more manipulation. But the most powerful feeling I had was the knowledge that I had finally regained control. I had fought for myself, and I had won. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back what was rightfully mine, and making sure that everyone knew the truth. As I left Harold's office, the finality of it all settled in. The fight was over, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with who I was and what I had accomplished. I was no longer just Sophia Vasquez, the senior project coordinator. I was Sophia Vasquez, the woman who took back her career. And no one could ever take that from me again. It's funny how life sometimes feels like a series of parallel tracks, events that unfold, seemingly unrelated at the time, only to converge in a way that makes perfect sense in hindsight. When I first started at Reynolds Architecture, I never imagined it would take this much to reclaim my worth, my integrity. I thought hard work and dedication would be enough to earn the recognition I deserved. But in reality, it took more than just working harder. It took standing up, speaking the truth, and refusing to let anyone diminish my value, no matter how powerful they were or how deeply entrenched they were in the system. The day Karen left the office was a turning point. It wasn't just the end of her career at Reynolds, it was the end of a chapter I'd been living in for so long. A chapter where I was constantly fighting to stay invisible, to avoid conflict, to keep my head down. But that day, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. There is power in being seen. There is power in standing tall, in demanding respect, and in fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Over the next few months, the landscape at Reynolds began to shift. The firm, which had once felt like a battleground, now felt more like a place of collaboration. People began working together, sharing credit where it was due. The environment was healthier, more honest, and there was a sense of pride in the work we were producing. I too had found my stride again, overseeing the Portland waterfront project with renewed focus. The final design, which had once been stolen and misappropriated, was now rightfully mine, and I was leading it toward completion with the full support of my team. We were going to create something remarkable, something that would stand for years to come. I continued to receive messages of support from colleagues, old and new. David, my unwavering ally throughout the entire ordeal, had been promoted to senior architect, and he asked me to join him in mentoring some of the younger staff. It felt like a true, full-circle moment. I was no longer just the person who had fought to survive. I was now a mentor, someone who could guide others, protect them from the same kinds of professional betrayals I had endured. In many ways, I was able to heal from the betrayal because I had found a way to rise above it. I had the courage to speak up, to make the truth known, and to reclaim my career. But I also found something deeper in the process. I found the ability to forgive myself. I had spent so much time blaming myself for not speaking out sooner, for not confronting Karen before it got this far. But the truth was, I had done what I needed to do when I had the strength. I had learned slowly but surely that my worth wasn't tied to anyone's recognition, but my own. The public acknowledgement of my work came in many forms. I was invited to speak at architecture conferences, to share my vision for sustainable design, and to mentor young architects who were eager to learn from my experiences. It wasn't the fame that appealed to me. It was the opportunity to create change, to ensure that no one else would have to face what I had faced. It was my way of paying forward the lessons I had learned through hard-won experience. In the end, it wasn't just about exposing Karen for who she truly was. It was about finding my own voice in the process. It was about finally taking ownership of my work, of my career, and of my future. I had spent so many years allowing others to define me, to shape my reputation, and to take credit for what was mine. But I had learned the hardest lesson of all. The only person who can truly define you is yourself. I remember the day I stood before the Portland Development Commission, presenting the final, refined vision for the waterfront project. The sense of accomplishment I felt wasn't just because the project was going forward, it was because I had done it. I had created it. It was my vision, my work, and I was the one in control of its future. I had proven not just to the world but to myself that I was capable of greatness, not because someone gave me permission, but because I took it. As I stood there, speaking confidently about my design, about the future of sustainable urban spaces, I couldn't help but smile. My journey had been long, and it had been filled with challenges, but it had shaped me into the person I had always hoped to become. Strong, resilient, proud of the work I did, and most importantly, proud of who I had become in the process. Looking out at the sea of faces in the room, I realized something. The past was finally behind me. I was no longer just the woman whose work had been stolen, the woman who had fought for recognition. I was now the woman who had taken back everything she was owed. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had earned my place, not just in the firm, but in the world. No one could take that from me anymore. As I wrapped up the presentation and received the applause from the Portland officials, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The battle had been hard, but the victory was mine, and the future, for the first time in a long time, was entirely in my hands.